welcome to Integrated Wellbeing, the podcast and YouTube for people grieving and the professionals who companion them through that. I'm very fortunate today to have a very distinguished guest. He's not extinguished at all. He just celebrated his 90th birthday, Dr. Stanley Krippner. So Stanley, hello. It's so nice to see you today. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Georgena.
I'd like to share with you his outstanding background. Stanley Krippner, Ph.D., has held faculty appointments at Akamai University, Fordham University, Kent State University, New York University, Saybrook University, and Sofia University, the University of Puerto Rico, Wagner College, and the California Institute for Integral Studies. He's the former director of the Child Study Center, Kent State University in Kent, Ohio, and of the Dream Laboratory. Maimonides. Thank you very much. I forgot to check with him on how to say that one. Medical Center in Brooklyn, New York. And he has received the Lifetime Achievement Awards from the Parapsychology Association, the International Association for the Study of Dreams, and the Society for Humanistic Psychology. He is the past president of all three groups, as well as the Society for Psychological Hypnosis, which awarded him its 2002 award for distinguished contributions to professional hypnosis. Dr. Krippner is a fellow of the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion, the Society for the Scientific Study of Sexuality, and 5 divisions of the American Psychological Association, which granted him its 2002 award for distinguished contributions to the international development of psychology. He is the co-author of the award-winning book, Personal Mythology, and co-editor of the award-winning book, Varieties of Anomalous Experience, and has published over 1,000 peer-reviewed articles. Since 2010, he has held international certification as an advanced alcohol and other drugs counselor. And as we were talking today, I said, and there are some more books that you've co-authored. And he said, yes, about 22 of them. So it is with great, great gratitude that I welcome him. And Stanley, I'm very privileged to be able to call him that. Will you please tell us how you got started in this field?
I think that one might say that an early event, when I was about 11 or 12 years of age, I had a terrifying experience, and I was not even asleep. I was wide awake. And my experience was that my uncle had just died. I'd been thinking about my uncle because he is the only rich member of our family, and I needed some money to buy some encyclopedia yearbooks. And then I thought, no, my Uncle Matt cannot help it. He's dead. Don't know why I thought that. But a minute later, my mother was screaming, and I went downstairs from my room, and she said, your Uncle Max just died of a heart attack. So that is the experience that got me interested in studying these unusual experiences. And I would listen to the radio. This was long before television. I would listen to shows on the radio that dealt with these unusual topics. And then once I was able to find the right books and articles, I was able to look at it that way too. So I simply followed that along and began to attend professional meetings of organizations that featured such experiences. And then one thing just led to another. Back in those days, I had no idea that I'd be writing articles or books about the topic, but that just sort of naturally followed once I began to attend the professional meetings and read the professional books. I think it's important to note that I could have gone in a very, very different direction. I could have gone in a more esoteric dimension and started to read the New Age books, which were popular a few years later, or to go into some interesting but really non-scientific areas of study, like alchemy and astrology, other things like that. Though that did not interest me, I was interested in the scientific approach to it all.
Thank you. And so what I'm hearing is that you really followed your intuition. You didn't really have a mentor or a plan, but it was something that was greater than you, and you said yes to it.
Yes, you're very true. Now, eventually, I had any number of mentors. I certainly owe my mentors a great deal, both my male and female mentors, but they came much later.
So you got on the path, you listened, and my goodness, that must have been terrifying for that 11-year-old boy.
I wouldn't say terrifying, it was simply surprising.
Surprising, thank you.
It didn't scare me. It didn't scare me off.
It didn't. No. So I know that many people refer to you as the dream expert. And I'm very curious, how did you become the dream expert?
Well, first of all, I don't use that term myself because there are plenty of other dream experts, many of them much more expert than I am.
Okay.
Yeah, but to answer your question, I began recording my dreams when I was in high school. And now I have literally dozens of dream diaries and dream notebooks, and I still copy down dreams whenever I remember them, which is usually a couple of times a week. And I actually have been able to use some of the dreams in different articles that I've been writing. However, once I became interested in dreams, again, I began to follow the scientific literature. It wasn't until the late 1950s before University of Chicago scientists began to publish their findings about how rapid eye movements were an indicator that someone was dreaming. So I simply read what was available, started to attend conferences on the topic, and then several dozen years ago, the International Association for the Study of Dreams was formed, and I was a charter member of that. And eventually I became president. And since that time, I've been a very, very active member in International Association for the Study of Dreams. And any of your listeners can simply go to the IASD website, and they'll get tons of information about dreams. They can find out how they too can become members.
Oh, thank you so much. Because as I said in the introduction, this podcast and YouTube that we're doing today is for people grieving. And so how can dreams be a way to create new connections with those who have passed?
Well, a number of ways. First of all, when somebody is grieving, the grief typically shows up in their dreams in one form or another. Now, it's important to note we do not remember all of our dreams. We remember just a small fraction of our dreams. So we might be having grief dreams and simply not remember them. However, they still can serve the purpose. A lot of activity that goes on in our dreams we don't remember consciously, but they're still working on our behalf because dreams can download information, they can download emotions, they can download feelings, all sorts of things can go on in dreams. And if it weren't for that downloading, we just have too much cluttering up in our minds to do effective work the next day. This is why it's so important that people allow plenty of time to sleep, plenty of time for dreams, even if they don't remember their dreams.
Ah, thank you.
Now, in addition to that, yes, sometimes people will have dreams about loved ones who have passed. And this is a whole, so we say, specialized area of dream work. The International Association for the Study of Dreams actually has members who are specialized in this, dreams about the departed. And on the one hand, one is never quite sure whether the departed is coming through in the dreams or whether it is the dreamer's construction of the departed that show up in the dreams. And frankly, in terms of grief, it really doesn't make any difference because these are dreams, they're serving a very, very healing purpose. And sometimes someone will have a dream about a loved one who has departed, and this sort of brings closure to them in one way or another, because they've been able to finally say the proper goodbye that they weren't able to do in waking life.
Absolutely. I remember, Stanley, it was just months after my son Reed died of suicide that I had what I term a visitation dream. And it began with my mother and me in junior high, where I had gone as a child or as a teenager. And there was somebody from my work business there with us, mother and I and her. And it was a strange meeting. And so we were asked to get up and go around and meet other people. And I walked over to the corner and there was my son Reed.
Oh, wow.
And I put my arms around him and hugged him and I woke up.
Uh-huh.
And it was so interesting. In fact, I wore this piece of jewelry today for you to see it because it was mother's wedding ring. And I had it made into this beautiful pendant.
Lovely.
And so with that dream, like you said, it was so healing. There was a real connection there. And it was marvelous.
Of course. Now, there are a few instances I run into that argue against the notion that we're reconstructing the loved one rather than the loved one actually coming through.
Mm-hmm.
Very close friend of mine died in a drowning accident. It was a great loss for everyone concerned. He was not that old. He had a brilliant reputation in his field, but he was very adventurous. He went out diving. He never came back.
Mm.
And about 2.5 months after he died by drowning, his wife was beside herself because, you know better than I, when somebody dies, especially suddenly, there's all sorts of loose ends that they leave
Yes.
untangled.
Right.
So anyway, this friend of mine came to his widow in a dream saying, the item that you're looking for is your basement, and it's actually behind a stone on the west wall. So she woke up, went down to the basement. Much to her surprise, there was a loose stone that she didn't even had paid attention to. She pulled out the stone, there was the document.
Wow.
This was a very bizarre way for her late husband to have stored something away. But as you know, sometimes you get an important document and we are so eager to preserve it that we put it in a very unusual place, thinking that we'll remember it, but it'll be safe there from anybody else. Well, my friend, alas, died before he could resurrect, but he came through in a dream, and his widow found it, and it served the purpose.
Oh, that's absolutely amazing. So I'm very curious, can people who are grieving invite these kinds of dreams? Because what I heard you say earlier is, oh, we're all dreaming, and have the grief dreams, but can they invite a specific dream?
Well, they can do it. It's not always easy. And we have no idea at this point how successful we will be. However, there is, I've got so many memories about this. One of my students never got to know her father because her father died when she was in her infancy. And she wanted to meet her father in a dream. So I said, well, you must make an intention.
Yes.
Several times a day, you tell yourself, I'm inviting my father to appear in one of my dreams, and use different wording. You realize it took her 2.5 months, but she finally had a very, very vivid dream about her and her father.
Ah.
And it was so realistic, it satisfied her.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of your listeners, yes, you can invite a past loved one to appear in a dream, but it's not on and off. It's not like a light switch. Dreams are very complicated. They're very, very subtle. And so you simply do your best. And again, if this is important for you, you simply do the intention a couple of times a day and see what happens. Now, there's another alternative path, and that is to try lucid dreaming. In lucid dreaming, a person is awake and aware while they're sleeping. Back when I was in college, my professors were denying that this could ever happen, and they were wrong. Just like my professors were wrong about a number of other things. And so now, if one has a lucid dream, they can tell themselves while they're dreaming, I want to make contact with my loved one. They can do this in the lucid dream itself. So, and again, it might or might not happen. We simply don't know all of the boundaries of these experiences, but it might be worth a try. However, there are some excellent tutors like Ryan Hurd and Robert Wagner, just to name two names. They actually do online courses on lucid dreaming to teach people how to be a lucid dreamer. So if that is of interest to any of the listeners, yeah, there are ways that you can find out about it by taking a class. Or you can join the International Association for the Study of Dreams, and then that enables you to take several classes free of charge and go to websites that have all of the instructions. So in a lucid dream, there are any number of things you can do, and there are also things that you can't do. You can't do completely everything in a lucid dream. So you don't have to get your expectations unrealistically too high. But lucid dreaming has been quite an opportunity for some people to make contact with a loved one who has passed.
Thank you so much. And we will definitely put a link to the IASD so that the listeners can readily access that website as they are listening to this. Mm-hmm. So if you were to recommend only one dream book of yours, which one would it be?
For an introduction to the topic of dreaming, there are many, many books far better than my books. Just to give you some names, any book by Patricia Garfield, by Gail Delaney, by Anne Faraday, all these people have written excellent books on how to work with your own dreams.
Okay.
They've done such a good job on this that I would not myself write a similar book because it would not be as good as their books. However, the book that might be of most interest, again, it's a co-authored book, and it's called Extraordinary Dreams. And we talk about several extraordinary dreams, lucid dreaming being one of them, dreams about the future being another one. And that book also has a chapter on visitation dreams. We use the same word that you do.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so there's a chapter giving some examples of visitation dreams and telling people how to work with them. So if they want some of my own books pertaining to dreams, I would say that that is the one that would be most helpful. I've written 6 or co-authored several other books about dreams. Why do I co-author? 2 reasons. The most important reason is I co-author with people who have much more skill than I do on a particular topic. And then the second reason is I like to give friends and students of mine a chance to put something on their resume, and being co-author of a book is very helpful for them professionally. So that's the way I try to help them out as well.
You're such a generous person in so many ways, Stanley. And thank you very much for that professional opportunity that you may have made available to so many people. It's wonderful.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Thank you.
And what was interesting about the visitation dream that I had, number one, I was living in Nebraska. It was 1998, and I had never heard of near-death experiences or after-death, communication, and certainly never visitation dreams because I was in a rural part of Nebraska. And what was so startling about this dream is that when I went over to hug my son, I woke up and I looked up at the ceiling and there were 2 white lights off to my left. And those 2 white lights traveled. One had a tail like a comet, and the other one was like a fuzzy light. And they were about the size of a silver dollar. And they traveled along the ceiling and over to the window, and they went out the window. And it was such an extraordinary experience.
It is.
Yeah, so very much so. Well, talking about books and books that you have written with others, I want to share with our listeners now this book, and it is Understanding Suicide's Allure, Steps to Save Lives. And it was, by healing people's psychological scars. And this was an extraordinary book for me to read, and I wrote a blog about it. And I simply want to ask you, because we have so many people who have experienced the loss of someone by suicide. And I'm curious now, this book has been out for almost a year, correct?
Pardon me?
I said this book has been out for over a year, correct?
Yes, it has. That's right.
And so I'm curious, what impact has this book had on your readers or people that reach out to you, Stanley?
Well, once a book comes out, it goes to possible reviewers, and they write a review, and it generally takes about a year for that review to appear in print. So There are 2 reviews of the book that I know have been written. They're very positive reviews, but they have yet to be published. Again,
Okay.
simply because of the time lag that's involved in publication like this.
Thank you so
So
much.
frankly, I just don't really know the impact that the book has had. Remember that there are 3 other co-authors, all of them clinical psychologists who actually work with distressed people, and I'm not a clinical psychologist, and so that's why I wanted to bring them on board to write certain parts of the book, because they have the expertise on these matters that I don't have. So all I can say is that I've gotten several emails from people who have read the book and they claim that they've benefited from it. And of course, the book does have a whole chapter on working with dreams for the grieving people. And this is something that you won't find in any of the other suicide texts. Also, our book discusses life after death and survival if you won't find that in any of the other suicide books, at least not the ones that I have read, not the major texts in the field. And then on top of that, there is a chapter on psychedelic therapy for suicide prevention, because we know now that psychedelics such as the magic mushrooms, such as psilocybin, are very effective in terms of handling depression and other forms of mood disorders. And again, it's important that people know about this in terms of prevention, because the information just isn't out there in any of the other books on suicide.
And that's what I so appreciated about this, is the scope of this book. I know that this book could have even been longer than it is, and it's got so much information in it. And what I appreciate about the book is at the end of every chapter, there are what are called takeaway points. And it's in a box that is a different color. They're highlighted bullet points. So if all you ever have time to do is to look at the takeaway points, it's just a wonderful, wonderful resource.
Well, that's exactly why we put in those takeaway points. And sometimes a person can look at the takeaway points first, and if that interests them, then they can read the entire chapter.
Yes, thank you for another time-saving way to utilize your book. I really appreciate it.
I mean, many people who read the book are not psychotherapists, and so they might skip the chapters on psychotherapy, and they might instead focus on chapters about prevention, for example. Mm-hmm. So what I tried to do in the book is to make every chapter complete in and of itself. And so a person can go through and pick and choose the chapters that they might be interested in, and that they don't have to think that they have to read the entire book. Yeah, the book is very long. In fact, it was too long. At the last minute, I had the late important chapters, yours included, by the way. And I'm trying to find another venue for your excellent chapter, and I'm working on that. And along with some of the other folks that did not get in the book, we just ran out of space. Sorry, that sometimes happens.
It certainly does. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I'm about, and many of my colleagues in Portland, Oregon are about, is shattering the stigma of suicide. And what is your, I guess I'm going to use the word advice, or your take? How can we, those of us who want to do this, shatter the stigma of suicide?
This has been something that I have seen for decades. When I began to go to psychological conferences, one of the early conferences I went to had a whole panel on forbidden topics, things that psychologists don't do much to because they're too controversial. And one of them was hunches about the future. No, straight scientists don't talk about precognition, premonitions, anything like that. But another one was suicide. This is on the taboo list for actually decades.
Yes.
As you know very well. And so if that panel were now to be resuscitated again, I don't think you will find suicide on the list because now it's become a little more mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
And also we have to be very careful about the vocabulary. Again, in the popular press, you see very often the phrase committed suicide. That is not a very, very helpful phrase.
No, it
If
isn't.
you know again better than I do, you can say somebody suicided, but committing a suicide, committing adultery, being committed to jail, it just gets into too many somatic problems to be useful.
Yes.
So
So
the way you even address the topic is something that's important.
thank you. So even if everyone watching this shared with other people they know the languaging to say they died of suicide. People die of heart attacks. People die of strokes. And so by you right now using the language, they died of suicide, that begins to shatter the stigma. So thank you so much for bringing that into our awareness. I've talked about that in many, many places, and yet it was something that didn't come to mind as I was considering our conversation. So I can't thank you enough.
Well, the way we describe things, of course, is very important for our understanding and for the understanding of other people. Sure.
It is.
Again, in our book, we make a big issue of the fact that suicide is complicated. That is in our very, very first chapter, and we point out how and why suicide became complicated. And one answer, of course, is there's so many, many different types of suicide, so many, many different ways for people to take their lives, that one size does not fit all.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important for all of us to remember who are people bereaved by someone who's died of suicide. One
Indeed.
size doesn't fit all.
That's
and
right.
Even when people come to the suicide bereavement support groups that we have here in Oregon, Stanley, everyone's stories are so different. And there's a comfort in coming together with others who've been through that. And there is an opportunity to learn from one another as the nuances are shared.
Exactly, you're right. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So as our time together comes to a close, and I want to thank you so much for your presence, your knowledge, and once again, your generosity of sharing resources for our listeners. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we conclude?
One comment that I think is important. Many people blame themselves when a loved one dies by suicide. And that is undeserved guilt. Because suicide is so complicated, it's not linear, it's not cause and effect exactly. For somebody to say, oh, I wish I could have prevented a loved one from taking their own life, that's very arrogant. What makes you think that you have the power to do that? Life is complicated. So don't bat yourself over your head for not doing anything. Maybe there was nothing that you could have done. One will never know. But especially the younger people whose brain is not fully developed, whose sense of logic and reasoning is not fully developed, sometimes you never know what they might do with very little provocation, simply because of the immaturity of their nervous system. So why blame yourself? This is just nature. This is the way things are. Accept that. Get on with your life.
Did you hear that? Out with the guilt. That's a really good guilt buster that you just gave us, Stanley. So I can't thank you enough. And I really like the way you said arrogance. Who are you to think
Yes.
that yeah. So thank you. It was absolutely such a joy to have you here with us today. So there are links below. There is a great deal of information to guide you and support you. And once again, to each of you who have listened to the podcast, who've seen us together on YouTube, I thank you. Your time is precious. Your energy is precious. And we intend that this has been supportive and inspirational for you. Take deep care until we see you again next time.
Thank you.